So we hope that we can grab your attention, and please ask questions. We have Mike Shaney here with us today with 38 years of experience, actually 40 years in supply chain, 38 years of experience at P&G, and full of wisdom and gem. And we're just talking about how you can't make this up because he's lived every possible disruptions. And so his experience really comes through. Mike, I'll let you make a quick intro.
Yeah, look, it's a privilege to be with you today. And as Steph said, I have been working around 40 years in supply chains, and great experience with Procter in a variety of businesses: food, soap, beverages, beauty care, appliances. So I've seen a lot, and most of that has been running global supply chains. So you see disruptions all over the world, and I've been very impressed in working with TealBook. And all I can say is I wish I had TealBook when I was still with P&G running the supply chain, because that kind of data that TealBook brings is exactly what I needed. So.
Well, thanks for that plug, Mike. So if you don't know me, I'm Stephanie Lapierre. I'm the founder and CEO of TealBook. And my experience and my inspiration for TealBook came from my own experience building a consulting firm that was building procurement for hyper-growth companies for the most part. And so we were aiming to build procurement functions that was focused on enablement, transparency, scale. And what we quickly realized is as we introduced software, we started to see disparity in information and start to really subsidize with services, very expensive integration infrastructures between software, inviting suppliers to multiple portals. And very quickly, we start losing that transparency, losing that ability to enable in scale, because we had to do a lot of work around to get access to good data, and still having good data that's connected, that's insightful, that's readily available, just didn't exist. And so I became super passionate about solving this problem. It's not an easy problem to solve, but a few rounds of funding and a really, really smart team focusing on building this data platform that can unify your systems, that can optimize this amazing asset, which is your supplier base, and empower people to make decisions faster and better to respond to market changes. So that's us. We'll talk a little bit about TealBook at the end. But first, I want Mike to talk about his experience, because Mike, you've been through every possible disruption, and even through COVID, you had to live it as someone that was very close to the Procter & Gamble team and advising as well as a consultant. So I'd love for you to give us some perspective in what you've experienced and some of the things that have happened over the years that's really made you passionate about thinking about agility and resiliency in the supply chain.
Yeah, look, agility is really, and resilience has kind of become a passion for me as I think about supply chains. And it probably started in about 20 years ago when I was in the Pringles business, and we had a plant that had over 50% of our global volume. We were $1.5 billion business. A tornado hit it, and we were wiped out. And then all of a sudden, it was like the projection was it was going to take 4 months to get back, and our business would have died. Well, by great people and a miracle I don't have time to talk about, we were back up in 8 days. But it put a sensitivity to me of how sensitive our supply chains can be. And look, I've run supply chains that ship to 150 countries. I've had manufacturing sites in 40 different countries. And you learn that every time you see a disruption, where it could be some kind of natural disaster or some kind of currency issue or some kind of supply disruption or national disruption, you start thinking about, am I affected? And Dr. David Samichi Levi from Harvard, I worked with him some. He was at MIT then. And he talks about time to recovery. And it became very clear to me that, supply chain disruptions will occur. The key is, how quickly can I come out of it? And how quickly can I get back into it? And that means I got to thoughtfully build a resilient and agile supply chain that responds to the surprises that are going to come.
100%. And I mean, no one could have predicted the massive disruption of COVID. And it keeps on now. There's more and more and more, right? It's happening faster and in so many different components of disruption, and then the requirements too that are impacting our business every day is changing at a speed that we didn't experience, right, 10, 20 years ago, or at least we were not as acutely impacted as we are today.
Yeah, and the key to this is building a strong and diverse supplier base. Look, one of the things I learned early on is, the time to plan for this is when you don't have a disruption, to really think about the elements of your supply chain. And Dr. David from Harvard also found out that most of the big disruptions that he studied, the impact occurred way down in the supply chain. It wasn't in your own manufacturing site. It was in your supplier or your supplier's supplier. And so we started a process in P&G of really, you had to build contingency plans. You had to think through your supply network, try to understand where the weaknesses are, and try to build plans of what happens if this happens or that happens. A simple example, Pampers, we had 25 plants all over the world, but one of our key suppliers was focused in one area, okay? And they had a key ingredient. Well, we said a hurricane might hit that area. We better find a different supplier. Well, it was a lot of work. We didn't quite do it, but we at least had a plan of what we would do. Well, sure enough, a hurricane hit, but at least we had a plan of who to go attack, who to develop, and how to create that agility. So, and look, let's see what's happening in the world. COVID is a unique one, but look, with climate change, with forest fires, with hurricanes, with all the things that are happening, there are going to be disruptions, and we need a plan to do that. And we need to build a more agile and diverse supply base. I also always think of supply chains. Look, part of what's happened to us is most of us in the supply chain world and procurement world, what's our CEO ask us for? Reduce the cost, and reduce the cost. So cost has been a major focus, which has caused our supply chains to get very diverse, very long, and many times even centralized. Well, when I think of supply chains, my model is you got to balance cost, you got to balance innovation, and you got to balance agility. Well, now agility is really important because people are seeing with COVID, hey, if I can't ship, I don't get revenue. And my encouragement to all of you as you think about your role in procurement and developing the supply chain is try to balance all three of these and try to find the wins that get us more agility, lower cost, and innovation. And that comes, I think, from a strong and a more diverse supplier base, which means I got to understand my suppliers and have good data on each one of them.
That's right. And the network, right? The access. I think we've talked about this when we met, where having a contingency plan is really important. But if you have no way to go to act on that contingency plan, it's just a plan. Yeah. And I think we saw that a lot through COVID. Is perhaps there was contingency planning, certainly not at that extent. And it was hard to predict which industry was going to be impacted both ways, right? You could have been, suddenly the demand for what you're providing is so high, and you need to find suppliers that have the capacity. You maybe need to find suppliers in different countries, maybe locally, to be able to ensure business continuity and capitalize on the opportunity for growth. And then you've got companies on completely the other side who are asked very quickly to reduce costs. And if you don't have visibility into your own supplier base, with the insight that allows you to respond to those very quick demands, it makes it incredibly difficult. And I think very damaging, and that's what we saw a lot during COVID, is it damaged relationship or partnership with suppliers. It impacted suppliers in a really negative way because there was no real opportunity to have the insight to do this in a way that maybe could have been less disruptive, maybe could have been acted on faster, et cetera.
Yeah, and that insight can help you as a company, but it also helps your suppliers if you can help them look beyond, because maybe they need the secondary supply. Because a lot of David's research said it was this tertiary suppliers where the issue came in. And again, it comes back to having that visibility and understanding, and thinking of ways that I can diversify my supply base, not only from a traditional diversity, but also from a location and other standpoint. But boy, that takes work, and it takes good data. And that's where having a way to understand it and evaluate it and see what the alternatives are becomes so important.
Yeah. I completely agree. And just talking about innovation for a second, I was on this panel with the Canadian government, and they were talking about how they were all about cost reduction, and when to, looking at alternative to some of the brand names on medication, to a point where all the innovation was sucked out. Like there was no real opportunity in Canada to turn around to partner with a vaccine company to be able to develop vaccine, because the innovation has not stayed here. It's all been cost driven. So I think that resonated, transfer that into the enterprise. And I think you could easily see how, just being driven on costs would have a huge impact on innovation. And as we know, innovation is a huge revenue driver. It's an opportunity to increase sustainability and growth of the organization, and we can't lose sight of that. So I really like that way of balancing model.
And it's all about how we create value. I mean, cost is one way to create value, but the agility allows us to respond to changing consumer needs and changing customer needs and meet whatever requirements they are. Because if you can't ship, you can't do revenue. As you said, the innovation becomes part of our long-term revenue growth. And without it, most of us as companies will starve. In my company and most of the companies I work with today, if you don't have a long-term innovation plan, somebody's going to beat you. And your suppliers can deliver a ton of the innovation. And I could give a lot of stories of how our suppliers have delivered innovation to us to help us grow as a company. And that innovation is part of what we do. And frankly, some of the best cost breakthroughs too come from innovation. So you have to look at all three. And I hope people don't overreact to only look at one, but think through their business model and how to balance it.
Yeah. Well, so, and I don't think it's by lack. When we're talking about not having access to good data, that's the data internally on your suppliers or externally when you want to tap into a network to be able to find alternative suppliers for many reasons, right? We have cost savings. If cost saving is, more important on that triangle, you want to introduce competition. That's the fastest and easiest way for you to be able to achieve cost savings. It could be also finding suppliers in different countries to be able to support growth or support. Yeah, I mean, you may want to replicate. Even with Brexit, we saw that the need to replicate your supply chain in different country requires an enormous amount of time and insight to relocating your supply chain from China to North America to comply to the executive order, right? The use cases are quite endless. And what we've seen in a recent study with Wakefield is that 96% of procurement and supply chain executive were prioritizing agility over cost savings. And my reaction, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. My reaction was like, well, to me, agility means cost savings. It also means innovation. It also means, risk mitigation and meeting corporate social responsibilities in a balanced way across the different areas of demands of the business. And it's all of the above, right? Because different parts of the organization has different requirements, that you have categories where you have multiple suppliers for no good reason, that people can't find the information. So they introduce new suppliers suddenly, and we've seen this in master data with, you got 4,000 marketing suppliers and you have no idea what they do beyond even what you may be paying them for. So to me, agility means hyper cost savings. It also means innovation and all the other requirements.
Yeah, it really does, Steph. And again, if I think about it, there's an old term, never waste a crisis. So, everybody's in a crisis right now and everybody's looking at agility. And frankly, in some ways, that's a good thing, because I think agility has always been a support in supply chains. But I would encourage people not to overreact and say that's the only thing I'm concerned about. The reality is, if I get a more diverse supply base, if I get a more distributed supply base where I have some local, I reduce some of my transportation costs. If I think through that carefully, I think, as you said, I can get a more competition in my supply chains. I'll ultimately lead to better costs, and I'll ultimately lead to better innovation. I found innovation can come anywhere in the world. And I think if you get that kind of balance, that then you'll be able to withstand, at least better than the competition, what issues that you're facing when you have disruptions. We had a major disruption when the hurricane hit New Jersey. It's like, we don't have any plants in New Jersey. Why? Well, because our flavor and our fragrance suppliers were centralized in New Jersey. And so it shut them all down. So all of a sudden we're like, wow, we need a more diverse and balanced supply base to move that kind of stuff around. Well, ultimately, we did that, and it led to a more cost competition. It led to more innovation because we had a diverse set of suppliers. So you can get the win-win-win. I saw it in Pampers. I saw it in our flavors. I saw it in multiple businesses where building that more diverse foundation will help you be better long-term.
I know this is not in the slides, but we did talk about this last week. We had a webinar with William Bagley at Freddie Mac that talked about diversifying the supplier base and the importance of bringing that pipeline of small and diverse businesses into your supplier network. And one of the challenges is that we've seen is that small and diverse businesses in the first place, they're hard to find. they're hard to collect information from, and the impact of using technology to have more visibility across the entire universe of small and diverse businesses. And what I've recently learned is that only 5% of businesses that meet the small and diverse requirements or minority-owned requirements are certified. Right, so we're talking about 95% of the entire ecosystem of small and diverse businesses, which is the pipeline for innovation, are not certified, and often enterprise are not necessarily recognizing that because they're not reporting. And I know in Europe and in other countries it's not as prevalent as North America, but I think it's going that way. We're hearing from our customers, the importance now of building global diversity initiative, not to meet compliance requirements, but to be able to enable a pipeline of innovation to come into their ecosystem, building more resiliency, more diversity, more innovation that can drive, again, better outcome and digital, success.
Well, this is one of the things where I said I wish I had TealBook sooner, because we had a diversity program for years, but it took an army of people to find those suppliers. And if you think about it globally, again, wherever you're sitting, think of all those small suppliers that could be out there that could bring some unique innovation to you, and how much effort it takes to find them. If we could find them and develop them, we might have one of the next breakthroughs sitting around that we just don't know it's out there. So the challenge is, how do I find those individuals and get good data on them?
And then making that information accessible across the organization too, right?
Correct.
People need to be able to find that data really, really fast. And we've seen that with the UK government. One of the examples that I like in post-COVID, we had offered the market if anybody had disruption, which was a lot of companies, to come to us, and we were going to give them lists of suppliers that were most similar to, I apologize for that, most similar to the ones that they were doing business with. And we got a request from the UK government, who was a lot in the media, to find PPEs that were meeting requirements. And we've seen this in countries even like Canada, where planes would come back from China empty. And so what we were able to provide to them in 72 hours is, we've set them up with TealBook and give them access to 60,000 manufacturers of PPEs by location, by type of PPE, and by ISO certification. So sure, they could have done this probably on their own. It would have taken them a few years. By the time you're building it, the data changes so fast, but it was how fast they were able to put their hands on information that allowed them to then contact those suppliers directly and be able to get responses from them almost in real time. And that's the power of having machines to be able to do things that we used to do. And we'll jump into the complexity of today's environment, but we have been trying. So again, I'm not going to say that this is new news, because for 40 years we've been talking about, how do we get better data? How do we access data faster? How do we make this data readily available? How do we improve the data in our systems? And so a lot of organizations, and some of the most sophisticated organizations in the world, have been trying to solve this problem. And we call it typically the big fat lie, but we'll call it the false assumption, is that software will actually fix your data. And what we've seen, I think it's been the belief in many other functions, even if we take the sales function with buying Salesforce, with the notion that Salesforce will fix your data. Well, it doesn't. Not with a lot of work or having the autonomous way to be able to improve that data. And we've seen companies like ZoomInfo and others coming out to feed that data in a way that allowed sales marketing to have better outcomes. And and the environment, you a decade later, where suddenly, the buy side is starting to be impacted We're looking at, this ecosystem of these digital solutions that are coming out to market. But when you ask them, how are you getting your data? Right? I was a judge on Digital Procurement World, and most of the companies would talk to us about their amazing solution, but you ask them, how are you getting the data into the solution? And they'll give you 100 reasons why suppliers will come to their portal. And I guarantee it doesn't work. Because we've seen this over and over again. It's not because you're buying a one suite solution end to end or multiple digital solutions that will guarantee better data. It actually it requires a massive infrastructure of integrations between those systems. Each of those systems will need services up front to be able to cleanse the data, structure it, update it, maintain it, and you're going to end up inviting your suppliers to a bunch of portals, and they just won't do it, not at the scale and at the speed. And the big component here is that there's no connectivity. If your data is not great in your systems, you're not getting the most value out of what you've invested in. And it's the connectivity between those systems that doesn't allow you, or the lack of connectivity that doesn't allow you to have that visibility and the insight that you need to drive your business. And, we've talked about this recently. Mike is part of our CPO advisory board. And we're talking about what are the options today? And the options so far have really been, let's buy more digital solutions to trying to digitize this procurement function. And again, if you don't have a data strategy, like step zero should be data, because then it's much easier to build towards what the market is talking about, is a fully integrated, interchangeable, flexible, agile technology ecosystem. And it could be including your legacy systems, but then give you the ability to buy and mix these niche solutions that have a lot of benefit to accelerating parts of your digital transformation. And I'm just going to pause here, Mike. I know that you understand more than anyone the complexities and where the world is heading.
Yeah, look, I started a lot of some of the digitization work in Procter many years ago, and to me it's analogous to when we started applying software to our manufacturing site. It didn't really work until we got the right sensors in place to understand what was really happening. The vibration sensors, the temperature sensors. And so as you're talking to your supply chain or manufacturing people, you can say, look, without that data, what's really happening, the software is useless. And I think the same analogy applies here. And the smartest people I've talked to in the software world, they're like, oh, I can automate all of this stuff end to end if I have good data. And they're just assuming the data is right. And you can analyze the heck out of bad data, but it'll still lead to the wrong conclusions. And I think it is for years we've been trying to work with supplier portals, and it's very inconsistent. So if we have the data, we know we can automate it, but the weakness is making sure that data is correct.
Yeah, and what we hear from our customers, and if you want information, obviously contact us, and we'll give you our view of the world and how you can unify those systems. You can optimize your suppliers and have this data foundation, because a lot of companies today are trying to figure out how to build this data layer, this data foundation. But a lot of time you're assuming that the data in your system is good. And if it's not, there's not enough machine learning and data scientists you can throw on top of that to make it amazing. And even if it was good, and that's often what I say to CPO, let's take a magic wand and pretend that your data is amazing in your system, which we know it's not. Well, let's pretend for a second. You still only know what you know. And it's what you don't know that's becoming even more important on your existing suppliers and on the suppliers that you should be accessing. So without going into the solution, please reach out to us if you're interested in learning more. That's definitely the problem that we are tackling, is this data foundation in a way that allows procurement to achieve digital procurement success. And we are almost running out of time. I just want to leave you on a note that you're sitting on trillions of dollars of spend. You've invested in sourcing, doing diligence, onboarding, managing, paying suppliers. It's a huge asset that is being untapped because we don't have the access and the quality of data and insight. And so it's a huge opportunity. Procurement, supply chain can drive that value. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, and I encourage you to rethink your data strategy moving forward. Look at how do you diversify, how do you build resilience in your supply chain, and that will get you better prepared for upcoming disruption. There'll be more, unfortunately, or it's going to be an ongoing reality. I think we're out of time, so I want to be conscious. Ashgard, I know you've sent me a few questions. I don't know if we have time. If we don't have time, we'll make sure that we get back to you separately. Okay, I'm guessing we don't have time.
What?
Or do we have time? Okay, well, I think we're out of time, actually. Is that correct? So we will get back to you with questions. We got quite a few questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much for attending and joining us today. We appreciate, hopefully you got some gems and some insight you can take back to your own organization, and it's helped you think a little bit differently about resiliency, agility, and your data strategy. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.